Good to know. And so John and I are going to be kind of switching between each other. Do you have the document open with who's saying what, John? Cool, that's good to know. So essentially what we're going to do is sort of lead through the process of meeting with or trying to influence your local decision makers. So that might be councillors, or it might be members of Scottish Parliament or MSPs. And we're going to sort of proceed on the basis that you don't know anything at all, just because that's kind of the easiest way and make sure it's useful for everyone. I get that we're all at kind of different experience levels here, but we'll kind of start from the basics, and hopefully we'll be able to build our way up to more advanced stuff as well. So we're going to be looking at how to make initial contact, normally via email, how to set up a meeting, skills for communicating during meetings with decision makers, and also how to vary your approach depending on the person who you're in touch with. So trying to think about the differences between councillors and MSPs, or between different parties and different bits of the political spectrum. So there's going to be a bit of kind of introduction, just introductory talk from John and me, with hopefully space for everyone to chip in. John and I are going to do a bit of a role play, demonstrating kind of positive and negative interactions with decision makers, and we'll be able to play a little game of bingo where you can kind of spot the characteristics. So we'll explain how that's going to work in a mo. And then there'll be space at the end to go into breakout rooms and either have a go at your own little role plays like that, or just sort of discuss tips and approaches with each other. So that's the rough shape of how things are going to go, but hopefully there'll be plenty of space for people to chip in and keep things yeah, nice and informal. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Lewis. So are we going to share the presentation on screen at this point then?
Would you prefer me to do it, John?
If you wouldn't mind, Lewis,
that's fine.
Great. Just while Lewis is doing that, folks, as we mentioned earlier, myself and Lewis and Sally have been involved in the Divest Parliament campaign for a few years now, and basically that is contacting our MPs and asking them to sign a pledge to divest their pension fund from fossil fuels, as a means of climate leadership, to basically say that if they are serious about the climate crisis, that they should be doing something about it, and their money shouldn't be involved in invested in oil and gas. And basically the same principles that we would use for contacting our MPs to get them to sign a pledge are exactly the same things that we would use at sort of any level of government for dealing with people in authority. So whether that's councillors for your local council, or your MSPs in your local region or constituency. We are sort of taking this from the aspect that people know what divestment is. So we're sort of assuming that if you're at this meeting, that you kind of know what's involved in divestment, and normally we'd sort of have a piece of the presentation that would sort of explain divestment. But if everyone's comfortable enough with divestment, I think we can just go ahead. Okay, are you controlling the presentation then, Lewis?
Yes, can you see it?
Yeah. So, sorry, I've got my chat box in the way. Okay, so basically you should be able to see hopefully the presentation on the screen there. I think Isla was saying she's having some problems, but hopefully that's just on her end or on their end, and it's not for everyone. So yeah, basically, as I said, we've been approaching MPs, but that's pretty much the same things that we would do for speaking to MPs as we would for councillors and MSPs. And it's kind of, but it's important to realize that there is a difference there. So your councillors will be members of the your local council pension fund, so whether that's the Lothian pension fund or Strathclyde, and then obviously the Highlands will be different. And then at the next level, then the MSPs will have the MSP, the Scottish Parliament pension fund. So basically we want to target them separately for the campaign for each of those campaigns, for each of those pension funds. And we would do the same again then. It would be a different pension fund for MPs. So as you can see on the screen at the moment, there's basically, in terms of councillors, there can be sort of anywhere between 3 and 5 councillors in your local ward. So that can be quite a lot of people to contact. And if you think you have one, you will live in a ward, but there will be several wards within your council. So the likes of Edinburgh, I think, has 11, if not more. But somewhere like, you know, Middle Lothian just has, I think they just have 4 or 5. And the size of the ward then will also differ from 3 councillors up to 5. For your MSPs, it's a bit more standard. You will have 1 for the constituency, and then you will have 7 who are elected on a regional basis. So you will generally have 8 MSPs representing you at the Scottish Parliament. The councillors obviously are in the local government pension schemes, and those again are broken down regionally, and MSPs are part of the Scottish Parliament pension fund. And then there's different campaigns for each of those levels. So the MSP pension funds, there's just the one campaign, Divest Scotland. So that's targeting all the MSPs across Scotland. And then at the council level, because there's different pension funds for several different councils, then it's great to see there's quite a few different campaign groups there. So obviously we've got Strathclyde, Lothian, Falkirk, and Fossil Free Highlands. You will be able to sort of target who you're going to speak to or who you want to get in contact with. As I said, if you've got 3 councillors, possibly even 5, you're going to have lots of different parties represented as well. So you'll have people from SNP, you'll have Labour, Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives and the Greens tend to be the largest groups on the councils, and then particularly in Highland, you will have a lot of independents. But you want to basically target the people that the councillors that you think are most likely to sign up. So in the likes of Edinburgh, we know that there are several councillors who are sort of skeptical on climate change, and so it would be best not to try and focus on getting them to sign up, because you know that it's probably unlikely. Whereas if you have the likes of a Green Party councillor, it's much more likely that they're going to support a divestment campaign and that you'll be able to get them to sign up to your campaign. Again, it's just really about getting to know as much information about your targets beforehand. Maybe the party they are a member of takes a particular position on climate change or support for divestment, or maybe the particular individual councillor or MSP has either come out in support or has spoken against. And really, as much information as you can get beforehand is really going to help you in your campaign, particularly in contacting the representatives, and then if you do get a chance to speak to them. Yeah, if you want to go on to the next one there, Lewis. Pardon me. So basically, all of your political representatives are contactable, whether that's by phone or email. If you go on to the council websites, they will provide the information for who your councillors are. If you don't know that, it will break it down by ward, so you can find your ward, and then it will list the contact details for each of your councillors, and all of their contact details will be there. They will all have an email address listed. Most of them will have a telephone number listed, and some of them even have a mobile telephone listed. So they're public representatives. So really, it's it's in their interests to make themselves available to members of the public. So you're not doing anything wrong by contacting a public representative on behalf of a campaign like this and asking them to meet with you, or asking them to sign a pledge. They are contactable, and it's always important to remember that they are, at the end of the day, they're just human beings. So it's nothing to be afraid of to contact your councillor, your MSP, or even your MP. It is important to remember, though, that they are very busy. Councillors and MSPs have a massive workload, and particularly with councillors, an awful lot of them will tend to have it's a part-time occupation for them because of the fact that it doesn't provide an awful lot of money. So trying to find time to meet with your councillors can be the problem, or can be quite difficult, but it's just important to just stick with it, and be as focused as possible, and let them know what it is you want to speak to them about. So they will be, they'll be getting contacted every day from lots of different campaigns, from their own constituents about fixing potholes in the roads or sorting out the bin collections, and they may not answer straight away to one email or one phone call. So if they don't, it's always worth just trying again and following up all the time. In terms of the something like divestment, it may not be the easiest thing for them to simply sign up to a campaign. And we've all seen the news recently with the IPCC report, and you would imagine that everyone basically should be in support of divestment after that. But obviously, there are certain limitations or constraints on public representatives. So as we mentioned earlier, there's different parties. Different parties will have different positions on the best way to address the climate crisis. So if their party has taken a line and they're deciding not to support divestment, then it'd be very difficult for an individual councillor to support that. But it's always worth trying. It's surprising the number of political representatives who actually don't know very much about climate change. So in a lot of ways, you're trying to provide them, you're actually trying to educate them a lot of the time. And it says there, per perception of the climate movement, a lot of certainly older public representatives will see the climate movement as a sort of, hippies or troublemakers, and they tend not to want to be engaged. But obviously, that is changing all the time. The likes of the young youth climate strikers have really brought it to the fore, and people are much more aware of things and see that it is obviously a very, very important issue. There's certain, I mean, it says that there's certain limitations that a local representative has in tackling the global issue like climate change, but it's important to remember that something like divestment empowers them. It actually gives them something that they can do. So they may think that it's too big for one councillor to deal with, but if they are able to sign up to a campaign like this and push for divestment, they're actually making a massive, massive difference in the fight against climate change.
It's me now. It might be. Yeah, so once you've kind of picked your targets and maybe you have a sense of who you think might be useful to try and meet with, then it's really important to do your research in advance. So this is what, when you're writing to a meeting with decision makers, gives you a kind of key tactical advantage over them. So they're a public figure who has information available about them. You're able to find out lots about what they've said in the past, what their stance is on policy, that will then make it easier for you to understand and relate to them and kind of have the upper hand, in a sense, in the conversation, while they won't be able to find out anything about you in advance. So it can be a really useful thing to use certain resources to get a sense of where they stand. So that might be where they generally stand on climate issues. So whether your kind of sense they might be a good person to target is backed up by the ways they voted in the past, or things they've mentioned on their Twitter or posts on their website. But it can also be a way of trying to relate the issue you want to talk about, i.e. fossil fuel divestment, to the things that matter to them. So a lot of councillors and MSPs choose certain issues that they want to make their things that they're striving towards achieving, because they can't do everything. They want to pick certain strategic targets, things that they want to use their influence as a decision maker to try and bring about. So they might be interested in animal rights, or they might be interested in infrastructure or workers' rights, or all sorts of things which are sort of connected with addressing climate change and fossil fuel divestment, but aren't necessarily at the core of it. But if you know those things about them, then it can be a useful way into the conversation. So if you know that they're concerned about kind of job losses from the decline of the fossil fuel industry, then maybe you can use that as a way into talking about the need for divestment in order to reinvest in the green economy and jobs for the future. So that, I think that can be a really key sort of tactical advantage to build up in advance, is getting a sense of the things they care about in order to find this common ground that you can use to then establish good dialogue with them. So some resources we use, I think someone already mentioned theyworkforyou.com, which is great. Just looking at Twitter can be really helpful. It's probably the social media that's used most widely by MSPs and councillors in order to kind of get out their message, and a lot of them have quite a public facing profile on there. You'll get a sense of the kind of stance they want to project. Many MSPs will have their own website. Some councillors also do, although it can be rarer. In general, there's just more information out there about MSPs because they're more high profile figures than councillors. And essentially just scroll through the internet and sort of online stalk them a bit, and you'll find useful things which you can then make note of and use as the starting point for conversation. So once you're through the research stage, it's time to get in touch. So the best way to do this is via email normally. So you can also send an old school letter, which I think can be nice in some ways, in that it maybe draws attention in a way that an email doesn't, because they receive a lot of emails. But email is sort of easier and cleaner, and what I would ordinarily use. So as John says, you can access their kind of official email address online. That's information that has to be shared because it's part of their duty as a public representative. So there ought to always be an email address that you can find them online. If you can't find it, then you have the grounds to complain because there ought to be one accessible to you. And the structure that you're looking at might look something like the below. So say hi, dear, whatever your name is. You introduce yourself and why you care about climate change and fossil fuel divestment. So you're writing to them in a personal capacity. So you're writing to someone who is there to represent you, talking about why you personally care about climate change and why you think it matters. I think this kind of personal touch is important when you're approaching the people that are meant to represent you, because that's how they're fulfilling their duty as a public representative. They're meant to be there to represent your interests. So kind of taking that personal stance can be quite useful in that sense, rather than approaching as the representative of a campaign which projects a slightly different persona. But I think you also want to try and connect to them on a personal level, because we as humans are sort of like that we're more likely to become interested in someone or want to relate or feel positively if we feel like we can relate to someone on a human level. So a personal opening can often be quite useful. The other good thing to do near the start is to have some kind of positive notes, so which might say involve thanking them for something they've done. So you might have found this out in your research, some sort of climate positive stance they've taken in the past, some move they've made, something they voted for, that you can thank them for. So that shows that you recognize good work they're doing, which will again put them on your side, but also shows that you know something about what you're talking about. So there's a kind of reason why you've got in touch with them rather than anyone else. And then outline the issues clearly and succinctly, and then you might follow by requesting an in-person meeting. So when outlining the issues, you want to keep it as short as possible. So obviously there's a lot that can potentially be said about climate change, and there's always a temptation to write very long emails, because we feel that by doing that, it demonstrates that we know lots about what we're talking about and are passionate about it and have so much to say. But that can ultimately be counterproductive, because as John talked about, they're inundated with stuff. They often will only sort of scan emails to try and work out what the key thing is that the email is asking them for. And you don't want that key ask to get lost amongst other things. So you want to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, which might involve kind of, say, mentioning one key piece of information or statistic, which we'll come to a little bit later on, or just kind of mapping out why fossil fuel divestment matters in the context of climate change, and why it would make a difference them pledging to support fossil fuel divestment, but keeping it as short as possible. And then you kind of have your key ask, which is what we put in bold here. So that might involve requesting an in-person meeting in order to discuss it further. Or if you think there's someone that can be easily convinced, you might want to just ask if they want to do something like sign the Divest Scotland pledge. But make sure that whatever the ask is very clear and doesn't get lost within the body of the email. So you might want to make sure the ask is very near the top of the email, so it's very clear from the start what you're asking for. Or as we've done here, you might even want to put it in bold. That's actually done quite a lot, and I think it's quite appreciated by people reading a lot of emails, just making it very clear immediately what you're getting in touch about. Yes, and a point in the chat, it's also a great idea to ask for a Zoom meeting at the moment for COVID safety. So yes, when we originally designed this training, we said an in-person meeting. Still believe that in-person meetings are the best way of developing that kind of personal rapport, but a lot of MSP and counsellor surgeries at the moment are still happening online via Zoom. So that is probably what you might want to suggest at the moment until things change. But also a good point. So then at the meeting itself, either on Zoom or in person, probably a lot of the same tips as apply as for emails. So you want to find common ground, so you can use your research to do this. So frame the issue in a way that will speak to them. So thinking about what the stance of their political party might be, or looking at things they've said in the past or particular issues they care about. You can use those as a way in to divestment that doesn't alienate them potentially. You might want to choose words and phrases based on their values. So you can choose to, when talking about divestment, approach it from an ethical stance. So you can say that it's immoral to invest in companies that are profiting from the destruction of the planet. But you can also phrase it in a much drier economic angle. You can say that it's causing harm to continue investing in fossil fuels, which is an industry that we know needs to end. So it's, you know, as an investment, it's an ineffective and potentially dangerous one, because those are industries that need to go into decline. So you might want to pick what kind of approach you take based on what values you think your target holds. Third point, very important, have specific and realistic asks. So you want to make it very clear what thing you want them to do. And often you're going to be asking them for just one thing, because they're not going to commit to doing a huge range of things, at least at first, unless they're very keen. So often the main thing is signing a pledge. So signing the Divest Scotland pledge or a local campaign pledge saying that they support divestment. That's important in order to kind of build this momentum. So the more local councillors in an area publicly say they support divestment, the much more likely it is going to be that the committee that is in charge of making that decision thinks that it's a worthwhile and realistic thing to do. Another ask might be to write to the pension fund committee members themselves and ask about divestment or some other more specific ask that you might be interested in. You can offer rewards, so you can make it clear that if they do the things that you want them to do, you'll be pleased, and can share the good news about it on social media, for example. Or it could be simpler, and that could just be assurance of a good ongoing relationship. So a lot of councillors and MSPs are kind of keen to foster connections with local groups within their areas, because it's useful for developing understanding of their area, but also a good public image. So if there's assurance that you'll be able to work together positively in the future, that's something that they might well be interested in as well. I think just a couple of other general tips that aren't on this slide, but you probably want to approach from the off on the assumption that you're going to be best friends and everything's going to work out. So approach assuming that you know, they're another kind and generous person, that you can develop a good relation, that you want to work together, at least in the first meeting. Because if you approach on that basis, they're much more likely to then want to work with you. I think especially if it's a decision maker that we've disagreed with in the past or have problems with, there can be a temptation to go in almost too hard and want to show how you disagree with them or all the things they could be doing differently while you're in the room. But there's kind of a risk of alienating them that way unnecessarily. So I think trying to go in this friendly way that tries to find common ground is often the best place to start. Although you may find that if they then do disagree with you, then you do need to go to that other place where you sometimes do have to adopt this more oppositional stance further down the road. But often it's unhelpful to in the first instance. And I think the other key thing is not to be nervous. So it's important to remember that they are there to represent you. They're a public servant fundamentally. They're meant to be looking after the interests of you, their constituent or ward member. So in that sense, you know, they should be looking to support you. So it's easy to feel intimidated by these big public figures, but their job is meant to be to look after your interests. So I think that's important to bear in mind. As John's mentioned, you probably also know more than they do. So they might not know that much about climate change. They probably won't know that much about what fossil fuel divestment is. You will also know more about them because of your research. So you'll be kind of starting at an advantage in a sense. So I think that's also important to bear in mind. and also they're just a person. So I think when you kind of read up about people and do the research, they can kind of become inflated in our imagination and seem bigger and more important than they are. But I think a lot of us, when we've actually met with the decision makers in person, we found them to actually be almost disappointingly ordinary. So yeah, don't expect them to be too intimidating, because often they're not. And they probably, yeah, if they're doing their job well, they'll be trying to make you feel comfortable as well. So obviously it's acceptable to feel a little bit nervous, and they might be expecting that, but don't let it overwhelm you, because there's no reason to feel too nervous about it. Shall I pass back to you for the conversation technique slide, John?
Thanks, Lewis. Yeah, so as Lewis was saying, you know, try not to be nervous. It is really just about having a conversation with someone. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. You're just going to have a chat with another person. Don't think about it as trying to, you know, present the entire argument for divestment, or you know, to completely change somebody's mind. You're just going in to have a chat. So yeah, there's a few techniques or a few tips that we would suggest in this case. Basically, give them assurance. So, you know, you want to sort of strike up a good relationship with your decision makers, and you want them sort of to know that that's what your intention is, that you're not going into the meeting to basically attack them for not supporting divestment. You want to basically get them on board, and if you're not getting them on board in this meeting, that you want to at least be in a good relationship with them on an ongoing basis, and hopefully they'll come around you, because they'll be more likely to sign up if they sort of feel positive towards you. So, you know, a good way to do that is to maybe open with something positive that they've done. So in the likes of, for example, the Divest Parliament campaign, what we would do is research maybe the questions that they asked in Parliament, and if they asked a question about the environment, or if they were, you know, maybe involved in cycling schemes or something sort of, you know, positive in their local area, maybe start out with mentioning that and say, oh, you know, thank you very much for your great work on the cycle scheme in your local area, and that would strike them very positively, the fact that you know something about them, and that you're complimenting them. You're not just coming in and speaking to them without knowing anything about them. That's quite impressive, and it definitely does help to break the ice and to build up a good relationship with the decision maker. Again, make it personal. You want to go in there and have a chat, or online, and have a chat with another person. So they're more likely to agree with you and to get on board with what you're talking about if you make it personal. So if you're able to say, you know, the reason I'm contacting you, or the reason I wanted to speak to you, is because I believe in divestment. You know, I personally am very concerned about the state of the climate crisis, and for me, divestment is the best way to do this. Just, you know, try and make it as personal as possible. So be politely assertive. You really don't want to go into a meeting and you know, you wouldn't like it yourself if someone just came in and started out the conversation by saying, you're going to sign this pledge, or you're going to support this campaign, and if you don't, you know, I'll never speak to you again. Basically, you just want to get your point across, but in, you know, in as polite a way as possible. So just remember that even if they're disagreeing with you, and even if they're maybe disagreeing with you quite strongly, divestment is the right thing to do, and we just have to remember that, and just, stay on message. It's important at the same time to be open to learn. So MSPs and councillors, as Lewis mentioned, they may not, be completely sort of aware of climate issues, but they will have a lot of information in other things and in other areas, and they may be able to suggest other councillors that you're able to speak with, or committees that you should contact. So it's important not to sort of write them off if they don't know a lot about divestment, or if they don't seem to know an awful lot about climate change. Just remember that they will know an awful lot about, potentially how the council runs, or the best way to get support for something in Parliament. So, and again, if you're receptive and willing to listen, then that's a good way to strike up a positive impression with decision makers. So yeah, as well as that, as I said earlier, it's not about going in and trying to make a massive presentation about divestment and to basically give them all the information that you can. You really want to have a conversation. You're having a chat with a person, and you're dropping in the sort of a few selected facts. You don't want to just start rhyming off figures and numbers and percentages. I think I remember hearing somewhere before that every time you mention a statistic, you lose 20% of your audience. So if you were speaking to a large group of people and you started using statistics, eventually people just tune out and stop listening. And you've only got one person on these calls, so that's not very many 20%. So it's important just to have a few facts, and it's also easier to remember. So if you do, maybe get a bit nervous, it's easier to remember a few facts rather than trying to remember an awful lot of information about divestment. Some of the best things to mention are usually where it has been successful in other areas. So if you're able to say that the likes of New York are divesting, or that countries like Ireland are in support, or maybe the number of other councillors or other MSPs who are supporting, sort of key information like that, rather than just sort of spewing data at people. And then, as well as that, it's always important to say thank you, both in the meeting and then a follow-up as well. So it's worth sending an email quite quickly afterwards, so it's still fresh in the person's mind. And as well as that, that helps to build an ongoing relationship with them if you say thank you for them taking the time to speak with you.
Okay, so hopefully that's enough talking from us. Should we, we're going to play bingo next, but maybe we should just pause there quickly in case there are any questions people want to ask at this stage, or things they'd like to contribute as well. Alan, yes.
Oh, it's just a small point based on my experience talking to councillors here in Edinburgh. Maybe it's a bit more difficult with online meetings coordinating yourselves, but it's always great to go in with a buddy. So when we met councillors, because yeah, we're human beings. It can be nerve-wracking talking to someone who is in a position of power. So it is useful to have someone there for moral support, and you can share. And like in my case, my friend and I, we kind of split the angle we would take and some of the statistics that we would mention, so that we didn't have to remember everything individually. So yeah, just put that out there as, if you are someone who might be quite nervous and quiet, to bring along a friend.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I know we've done that in the past, and it is nice having someone to back you up, because it takes the pressure off for sure. Question from Dorothy in the chat: is it best to go as a member of the public or representative of a climate change group, which makes them feel more apprehensive? think that's always quite an interesting question. I suppose, I don't know if John agrees, but I suppose I'd lead with being a member of the public or someone from their constituency. So you're there as someone that they're meant to represent. But once you're there, I think you can absolutely say that you're involved with a campaign, because that shows that you care and are passionate and are doing things, and that potentially you know what you're doing as well. So I don't think the two things are necessarily mutually exclusive. But I think, especially in an initial meeting with someone who's one of your representatives, I would say lead on being a person, I suppose. I don't know if you agree with that, John.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Lewis, and I think it's important to remember that they're actually more likely to respond to you in the first place and to arrange a meeting if they know that you're a constituent, because really it's their job to deal with constituent issues. So if you'll be able to arrange a meeting, and then if you go along and you're speaking to them, then they'll probably be more impressed by the fact that their local constituents are also members of environmental groups, and these are the issues that are important to their local constituents. Whereas if it's just as a campaign group, they might think, you might not even live in the area, and that they might not be as keen to get involved.
A question from Irene. Would you like to come in?
Yes, I'm thinking about what I would say about divestment. I would be tempted to say to a councillor or an MSP, the only way we're going to control or stop the fossil fuel companies is depriving them of money. Is that a bad thing to say, or is that just going too close to the bone?
I think it depends who you're speaking to. So I think some councillors, I think that would really communicate very well to. So I don't know, certain Green councillors or councillors on the more kind of radical end of the spectrum. I think that I think that kind of language communicates very well to. I think if you were trying to speak to a Conservative, it would be a big turn off, and you'd have to try and find a different way of approaching the subject. So yeah, I suppose it's trying to find the way that communicates best for that person, and it's different in every case, I guess. Kate. You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to really come in on what Irene was saying there, to say that, perhaps another way to handle that would be to point out that there's a danger of councils losing money and being left with stranded assets. So the Tory MPs might respond better to that.
In our experience, yes, they do, I think. Yeah. Because I think it's a Conservative values thing. It's about kind of preserving what you've already got and not losing it or whatever. That kind of that risk of losing the financial returns speaks to. Yeah. Any other questions or tips that anyone wants to share? Eva?
I just maybe mention that sometimes it's good to look for the party line, like what the party says, because some of them, they just repeat what is the party line instead of having their own opinion. So it might be good to be prepared that they're going to use it, and then maybe make some argument against it. That's it.
Thanks, Eva. That's a really good point. I know that one of the things that we tend to use in Divest Parliament if we're speaking to Conservative MPs is to remind them that Margaret Thatcher was the first world leader to actually speak out on climate change and global warming way back in the late 80s. So to make that tends to have a positive effect if they realize that Margaret Thatcher was talking about this 30 years ago. Certainly it makes them realize that it's not a green specific issue, it's not a Labour specific issue, it's actually it's something that the Conservatives can get behind as well.
Great. Well, if there aren't any more questions, we can move things on to my favorite section of this, which is the bingo section. So I'm just going to share a link in the chat, which maybe makes it easier, which is a handout, which probably I should have shared at the very start, which has at the top a very kind of slimmed down version of what John and I were talking about just now. And then underneath you can see bingo, what behaviors characterize a bad meeting. So, and I'll share this on my screen as well. Hopefully you can see that all right. So John and I are going to role play for you an imaginary bad meeting with a decision maker, kind of based on experiences, and we'll try and highlight some of the things to watch out for from both sides. So things that might you might want to avoid happening on the part of the decision maker, but also things you might want to avoid doing as a campaigner. And these are all things that have kind of been observed. Some of them are quite sort of intuitive interview skills type things. So kind of things about avoiding eye contact or crossed arms as signs that you're feeling awkward or uncomfortable in some way. So trying to have kind of open and comfortable body language. There's also this issue around conversational control. So I think John before was talking about being politely persistent. One thing that you might need to be persistent through is to try and avoid long drawn out speeches on the part of the decision maker. So something that sometimes happens when you try and speak to an MP, for example, is they dominate the conversation by going on and on about the things they've done and the things they want to talk about as a way of kind of taking control, and that keeps it in an area where they're comfortable and know what they're talking about, but might prevent you from being able to speak to the issues you really want to bring up. So you need to try and find a way to avoid it getting into that space, either on their part or on your part. You know, it may feel tempting for you to kind of speak on and on, but also you want to provide spaces for them to come in and to have a conversation. Mannerisms, watch out for people not giving their full attention, who may be kind of looking at their phone or a kind of I don't know, looking at their diary or notes or things, or being dismissive. Anything which kind of shows that they're not fully engaging, kind of evidence that you need to find a different way to draw them into the conversation. Similarly, on the campaigner side, you don't want to come across as frustrated or angry with them, because that can be alienating. And you don't want to be excessively nervous either. So trying to, I guess, come across as calm and composed. And then conversation content is probably, in a way, the key thing. You want to watch out for them not actually answering the question, a classic one in any kind of political context. It may be that you're trying to talk about fossil fuel divestment and they'll just talk about climate change more generally, which is you know, not really what you want them to, what you really want to be discussing. So trying to avoid that happening and trying to sort of politely draw them back to the conversation in hand. Same thing for straying off the topic. And also avoiding sweet talking. This is also something that comes up quite a lot, where they say things that sound generally nice about how much, how inspiring you are, or how much they appreciate you coming to see them, and things that sound lovely. And they may generally believe them and want to be lovely, but it's not what you're there to talk about. So trying to avoid that taking up too much time as well. On the part of the campaigner, trying to avoid vagueness, so making it very, very clear what it is that you want from the conversation. So that, yeah, that might involve literally saying, you know, I'm here as one of your constituents, and I would like to ask you to sign this pledge because this, and coming in and making it immediately clear what you want. Is often the most helpful way to go. So yes, you want to lay the groundwork and find that common ground and speak to their values, but they're busy people, don't have limitless time, and they'll get frustrated if it's not clear why you're actually there. So avoid vagueness if possible. Avoid exposing knowledge gaps. So this is on the part of the campaigner or on the part of the decision maker probably. So you can't be expected to know everything, but you want to try and give a sense that you know what you're talking about. So try and avoid getting into areas where you don't really know what you're talking about. So either keep it to the things you do know, or admit if it's something that you're not an expert on. That's fine, and they shouldn't expect you to know everything. And then finally, there's often a temptation when engaging with politics to come across as a bit cynical about the possibility for change to happen. And I think decision makers tend to respond better if you come along more kind of optimistically expecting there to be change, being passionate about what you want, and avoiding going into that cynical place, which can be quite a turn off for a lot of decision makers. And then finally, politics. So they may, as has been discussed, try and hold the party line. So they may just try and say, oh, well, this isn't what the party policy is, so I can't do anything. In which case you need to try and draw it back into that more personal place. You need to say, well, I'm interested in what you want to do as an individual and as my representative, and try and avoid them sticking to this kind of hold the party line thing, which is a way of avoiding actually giving a stance on anything. So trying to take it out of that place. And similarly, you might want to avoid emphasizing the party over the individual. So you, in order to try and encourage them to take this kind of individual act of signing the pledge, then you probably want to emphasize the power they have as an individual council or MSP, not as a representative of their party. Again, taking it into that more personal place. So yeah, these are just a few things that have been observed in meetings that have not gone so well. I'm sure there are plenty of other things. So John and I are now going to do a little role play demonstrating what a negative type of interaction might look like, because we think this is quite a good way of learning what a positive interaction might look like. So I believe John is playing the campaigner and I'm playing a decision maker of some kind. And maybe just keep an eye on that table in the handout. And if you spot any of these negative behaviors, then just type them into the chat. So if you think you've spotted something, just type it in and we'll see who can spot the most things. There could be things that are in the table already, or other things that we haven't even mentioned yet, because I'm sure you'll think of other stuff. And I think that's it. Should we give it a go, John?
Let's do it. Get into character. Okay. Well, I guess this is our call. Hello, Councillor. I can't remember your name. Sorry.
Hello. Yes. Always fantastic to meet one of my constituents. What can I do for you today?
Yeah, I'm here because climate change, and I want you to we need to talk about divestment, and I'm sure you know what that is anyway.
Yes, you're here to talk about climate change. Well, I'm always happy to talk about that because my party is doing all sorts of fantastic work on climate change. We've just introduced this new scheme where we're going to stop rinsing our dishes before we put them in the dishwasher. It's going to make a huge difference. I'm encouraging everyone to take it up as well. We're making this big public awareness campaign, which I'm sure you'll love. It's so fantastic that you're doing this work. It's really inspiring, wonderful to meet with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. So your party's really really good on this sort of thing. So I'm sure you're going to support our campaign. We want to, I think we want to take money from the pensions and not and put them into something that isn't fossil fuels. And it's really good for the environment. So I think you need to sign up.
I don't think it's our party line to take money away from pensioners. That's not something that I can support, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, not taking it away from pensioners, but we want to take money out of your pension and put it into something else because it's not supposed to be there. And it just wouldn't be fair if you didn't support this campaign, because it's a really great campaign.
Well, I'm sorry, but I have to follow my party line, and I don't have the power as an individual to make change that way. So I'm not convinced that this is something I'm going to be able to take action on. I'm very sorry.
Well, that's just terrible. So I can't believe that you would say that.
But that's very very unfortunate to hear. But thank you so much for coming along. It's really fantastic to hear about all the good work you're doing.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So obviously that's a very kind of pantomime version of it. But this is all based on real things that have been observed, and I see people spotted a good number of them. I was trying to find a way of looking at my phone surreptitiously, which didn't show up on Zoom. It's actually quite difficult to do. So Zoom does change that. I think maybe the thing you have to watch out for on Zoom is that the clues that they're actually looking at something else on their screen. So does anyone ever notice this, when you can kind of see they're actually reading something, and you can see the eyes tracking back and forth, and they're not actually looking at you. So maybe that's the Zoom equivalent of looking at the phone or notes. Okay, should we have a go at a more positive one quickly?
Yeah, let's try.
So a more positive interaction might not necessarily be characterized by them immediately saying yes to everything you want, but it would probably be characterized by forming some sort of positive, some kind of positive groundwork for action. So you can come away from a meeting without necessarily having attained what you wanted and still think of it as really positive. So I guess we'll role play a positive but still realistic kind of meeting. So let's say I'm some sort of massive Tory, and John has done his research and knows my stance and is trying to establish some useful ground. Does that sound all right, John?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Okay.
Good afternoon, Councillor. I'd just like to thank you for meeting with me today and taking time out of your busy schedule. I notice you've done a lot of great work on cycling in your constituency. That's something I'm very keen on as well. And obviously that's a great way to tackle problems with emissions from transport. The reason I'm actually here today is to speak to you about divestment. And that's something that you can do as an individual councillor to make a big difference on climate change. Is that something you would like to hear more about?
So firstly, thanks so much for recognizing my work on cycling. It's always good to hear that appreciated. And yes, I'm very keen to hear more about actions that can be taken in the local area to address climate change. I'm aware of the recent IPCC report that came out and keen to find new approaches. So can you tell me more about what it is you're looking for me to do?
Absolutely. And yes, it's great that you noticed the IPCC report in the news recently, and that you want to get involved in taking action to help with that. Basically what we're calling on you to do is to sign a pledge to say that you would like your pension fund to be divested from fossil fuels, and for that money to be redirected into to green energy solutions that will help to tackle the climate crisis rather than to fuel them even further. And the more councillors we can get on board, the more likely it is that our campaign will be a success.
That's interesting to hear about. An interesting strategy that I haven't encountered before. I'm not sure what my party policy is on this kind of thing. Do you know if any of my colleagues have been involved with divestment campaigning before?
That's a good question. And yes, so far we have several of your colleagues have signed up, and this is actually a cross-party campaign. So it's not just Conservatives, it's also Labour and Liberal Democrats and Greens, because it is a very, very popular and very important issue that many of your constituents are very interested in. So if you wanted to speak to Councillor Brown, I met with him yesterday, and he has already agreed to sign the pledge.
Ah, yes, Dave Brown, one of my good friends. That's very interesting to hear about. I value his perspective very much. So I'm not sure I can sign a pledge here and now, but is there anywhere I can find further information?
Absolutely, that's no problem at all. What I can do is send you an email just directly after this meeting with some more information on the campaign and with a link to sign the pledge. And perhaps we could meet at another time in future just to arrange some press coverage. It would be really nice to have your face in the paper to say that you are supporting our campaign, and I'm sure your constituents would be really happy to see that as well.
That sounds fantastic. Yes, always happy to have the support of my local constituents. So yes, if you can get in touch via email and send me further information, that sounds fantastic, and we can get back in touch in future.
That's excellent. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. There we go. I think that went all right. So a positive interaction might look more like that. So especially when approaching a Conservative who are historically the party that it's been hardest to get on board with divestment decisions, you would consider that a positive interaction well executed, I think. You're not necessarily expecting them to pledge immediately, but there is assurance of an ongoing relationship and the potential to get involved in the future. Obviously, at an actual meeting, you would have a lot more time than that to flesh out your points. This is a kind of slimmed down version, but that's kind of the shape of it that we might hope to see. Okay, great. So we thought for the last bit of our time, Ali, yes, you have a question.
Oh, sorry, I was just doing a clap react emoji. I'm really sorry.
I got confused between the clap and the hand up. So yeah, we thought for the last bit of the time, so we've got maybe got 18 minutes left. So we thought we might put everyone into breakout rooms in pairs of 2 for 10 minutes to have a go at doing something similar. So doing a little bit of a role play exercise yourselves. So with one person playing a decision maker and one person playing a campaigner, and trying to consider how you might go about trying to have a positive interaction. So you might want to pick a decision maker that you know yourself from your own campaign, someone that you want to convince or that you know from your area. Or Sally is also very kindly in the handout document put some example councillors and MSPs at the bottom. So you might also want to pick some of those. They come with a little bit of information about them. So that's kind of imagining that you've done a bit of research and know something about them that you can make use of. So maybe we'll go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes. You could have 5 minutes with one person being a decision maker and campaigner and then swap over. Or if you prefer, you can just have a bit of time to discuss in pairs how you might approach it. So if role play is not your thing and it's not for everyone, then you might want to just have some kind of free discussion time, think of a figure who you'd like to contact or meet with and discuss what your strategy might be. Does that sound good? Are you happy to activate the breakout room, Sally?
Would everyone like to join a breakout room? Cool. And we can have 5 breakout rooms. Does that sound okay? That would be about 2 people per breakout room. Okay, this is my first time doing it, so let's have a go. Irene, would you like a wee chat with us? I can stop the recording.